Hear that? Nothing? Me neither. But that's the perfect spot for your company's name to step into the spotlight. Become an underwriter for As You Mic It and let every episode be your curtain call. Slip a note to podcast@pashakespeare.org for more information.
They're far deeper than I ever gave them credit for.
I don't think that they've overthought it too much. I think it's like, this is all meaningless. So, murder! That's it.
That makes some sense.
If it makes sense, then it's not the point.
Oh, that's right. This is why I'm never going to be down.
Welcome to As You Mic It, the official podcast of Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival. I'm Jason King-Jones, Artistic Director here at PSF. And as always, I'm joined by Kim Carson, Director of Education and Community Engagement.
Hello.
And Connie Behringer, Associate Producer.
Hello.
This season's theme is focused on legends and legacy. And there is no greater legend to Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival than the legend of William Shakespeare. And it is our 250th birthday coming up for America. And we wanted to look at how Shakespeare really influenced the American experience, how the plays of a 16th century English writer really became part of our national story, and why they still matter as we approach this seminal anniversary for the United States. Later in this episode, we'll be joined by author and scholar James Shapiro, whose works, Shakespeare in a Divided America and the Playbook, among others, explore how Shakespeare's voice has echoed through moments of conflict, change, and renewal in our country. And we'll also take a moment to reflect on where we are in our own process of theater making here at PSF. But first, let's take a personal look at the 250th anniversary, the American experience, and the legacy of theater in shaping the conversations that define who we are as artists, citizens, and storytellers.
You first.
So now we're going to talk. Now we're going to talk about it.
We're going to talk about it. It said so right here. But first.
Yeah. This is an unscripted conversation, as always with our roundtables. We may stay on topic and we might meander off.
Probably.
We're pretty good at meandering off topic. But I do want to pose this idea, and it's one of the reasons why we're having this conversation now, is when you ask me who was America's first playwright, I will tell you that it's William Shakespeare, and I will tell it to you with a straight face. And that is because I firmly believe, and I think that we've got some history to back it up, and some of our conversations with James Shapiro will actually support this, is that Shakespeare was built into the educational system of those people who helped found our country. And knowing that we were the colonies of the British Empire. Before it was a British Empire, we were their colonies. And so much of how our founders understood themselves in the world, how they put ideas to language, how they structured their own thoughts and sentences, all came from this couple of centuries of writing that really kind of found its mark, often in the writings of Shakespeare. And we can talk more about this, but we know that, Shakespeare was when Shakespeare was writing in the late 1500s, early 1600s, the English language was still being formed. We know that Shakespeare himself, if he did not coin thousands of words, and we should fact check exactly how many words there were that we believe that were attributed to Shakespeare. If he didn't coin them themselves, they show up for the first time in his plays and his poems. Words that are such commonplace notions to us now found their initial instances in the plays of William Shakespeare. So he was both a genius for his time, and he was writing at a time that the language was still being created and formed, and the written English language was still malleable. That the language was still being created so much that in his plays, there were so many new ideas that took shape. There's a lot of words that never quite made it out of Elizabethan England. Some of the ideas and phrases kind of fell off the Darwinian timeline. But there's a lot of language now that we adopt, even down to just mundane words like bedroom and assassin, are words that were first attributed to William Shakespeare.
Eyeball.
Right. Eyeball.
Crocodile. Like, what? That's amazing.
Yeah. They first show up in Shakespeare. So it's impossible for our founders who were writing these founding documents, who were putting thoughts to this experience that we're having in the colonies is not working out right now with the crown telling us what to do on the other side of this ocean that takes weeks, if not months, for information to get back and forth. If that's not working out, we have to define who we are And ultimately, we have to declare our own independence. And ultimately, we have to create our own form of government. And then that wasn't working, so we have to create another form of government.
Right.
We're going to do that, and we're going to put those ideas down into words. Those words were written by people who had read and studied Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm. I like how you said the other day we were having a conversation about things we might talk about on this podcast.
Yeah.
And Jason, you had said, I just read that document yesterday. I just reread that document. And you're like, it's thick. It's a thickly worded document.
You're talking about the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah. And the best way to understand that document is if you understand how to read Shakespeare. I thought that was so interesting.
Oh, absolutely, though. Yeah, I mean, like when you look at Shakespeare, you look at, okay, first of all, if I'm going to read this and I'm going to like find how long these sentences are,
right.
I'm going to run out of breath reading these sentences often, right? Like, because the period is like 7 lines down in that text. We're not used to that kind of sentence structure.
Yeah.
Now, especially now, we're used to like 120 characters.
Right.
Like communicating in these pithy and sometimes not pithy, but short phrases and sentences. And Shakespeare didn't write like that.
No, I actually just read again the Declaration of Independence, and I have to be honest, after having a little bit of Shakespeare reading under my belt, I can read the Declaration of Independence and actually appreciate the drama of the language that's in there.
Right.
It's really such a passionate document and it's so alive. You really, really have a different relationship with it once you see how theatrical the whole thing is.
Yeah, how theatrical it is, and also how you have to be able to like hold ideas in your head and keep them there for a while. And I'll get back to this point. Trust me, I'll get back to this point while I elucidate all of these other subpoints. And once I get through those 5 or 6 subpoints, now let's get back to that main point that I said. And all of this means we need to declare our independence.
It's really remarkable to see how the language is influenced by their own view of culture.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And we know that John Adams was a great reader of Shakespeare. We know that during the Second Continental Convention, we know that George Washington left one night to go watch a production of The Tempest in Philadelphia.
It's amazing.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I love that.
We know that soldiers on both sides of the war were putting on for themselves performances of Shakespeare's plays, including Coriolanus, including Othello. They were themselves performing these plays. Right. We know that this was like colonial America. This was several decades later, but we know that a young Ulysses S. Grant, before he had the beard, before he was Ulysses S. Grant, actually was in rehearsal to play Desdemona in a production on a military base in Texas, until such time as they were like, no, that's not going to work. We need to bring in a woman. But
this is too close to the original practices. Let's bring in a lady.
But we know that from its founding, Shakespeare was a part of this culture, whether we necessarily wanted it to be or not, and whether theaters were allowed or not. And we know we're in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and William Penn, when this was a colony, William Penn did not want theaters in Pennsylvania, but he couldn't stop the fact that as we were getting into revolutionary America, that theaters were popping up just outside Philadelphia. There were performances that were happening. Sometimes they were by the Loyalists, sometimes they were by colonists, and it was happening also in New York. There were performances that were happening, and many of these plays were Shakespeare. Just like today, the majority of plays that are performed in America, the key playwright is William Shakespeare.
And in classrooms too.
Absolutely.
From the very beginning of settling in the colonies, Shakespeare's plays were being studied in the classroom, just like they are today.
Yeah, they were often read if they weren't performed. Even though Shakespeare's plays were, and we still believe are, a blueprint for performance, they were often read in the classroom.
Right.
So that we had writers, who kind of grew up, writers like Melville and Emerson, who kind of grew up with Shakespeare as a part of that culture. And of course, then founders of our nation and ultimately presidents who regularly read Shakespeare.
I think about the 250th anniversary, and yes, it's the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, but really it is a celebration of the fact that we've survived as this great experiment for 250 years.
So far.
And I think when I look at the American experience and I look at the relationship that we all have with each other, it is a remarkable thing. It's not just about, these are the founding fathers and this is what the founding fathers did and this is who they look like and this is this is the story. No, the story is the fact that thus far we have survived for 250 years.
Yeah.
And what we have is a remarkable experiment about how government should be run. What we have was unlike anything that they've seen globally up till that point. And we can't let that go. You know, the fact that there are these 3 branches of government that are there by design to provide checks and balances to keep us going. The fact that we as a nation, we have different backgrounds, and the only thing that ties us together is our Constitution.
Yeah.
That's the only common belief that we have. We don't share a race. We don't share even a language. What we share is this belief that this experiment, which is based on this one piece of paper, is going to survive and guide us through the whole thing.
Yes, and what you're hearing at this roundtable is what we believe to be like our core understanding of the American experiment. And there may be some other people who are speaking on other podcasts or who also share our country with us who might have a different understanding of what makes America America. But I think that what we're going to hear from us is that we believe at its founding is that we're a nation founded on ideals and ideas, and that these ideas then had to be expressed in language. Right. And that these individuals who were trying to put these ideas into words worked very hard to craft the correct words in the correct order with a lot of care and thought, and sometimes a lot of wild debate about making sure that these particular words were representing the idea of what it means to come together as a collective people, so that we can then return to these founding documents that then represent these ideas and ideals of who we are as a nation and who we can become and who we can continue strive to be as a collective nation of people. And Connie, as you said, we didn't have a common language. We didn't have a common nationality. We didn't have a common religion even. And that was kind of built into the understanding that we were a disparate group of people from lots of different backgrounds, and we had to create a structure and in order to then govern ourselves. And this isn't a political podcast, and we're not going to get into that too much. To get back to what Shakespeare was, though, is how it influences them, is that they had to put these ideas into words, and they had to find the right words in the right order to create the right meaning. And so it's the English nerd sitting around the table, or even Connie, who's a math nerd, who's learning to love language as well, who's looking at this stuff and now rereading some of these documents at a really great time for us to all go back and look at these documents to understand what were these key ideas that were part of our founding country, and how do we now carry those ideas forward 250 years later.
Well, you think about Shakespeare and what Shakespeare's role is, not just in American culture and American understanding of their world around them, but because Shakespeare is so international.
Yeah.
People learn from all over the world about Shakespeare. Shakespeare's been translated into over 100 different languages. And they bring that knowledge, because a lot of people learn about Shakespeare when they're in high school, when they're in grade school. Yeah. And they bring that here when they come here to the United States. And it is a part of the American experiment. It's a part of our understanding of each other.
You seem like you have a story you want to share about that.
I have so many stories, Jason, but I have one that's better than all of the rest. Yeah, I am a first generation. My parents came over here independent of one another from Korea. So my last name, Behringer, might not necessarily tell most of our listeners.
Doesn't sound very Korean to me.
It's not very Korean. In fact, that's my married name. And when my parents came over here to the United States, they did not know the language. My mom came over as a nurse, and she learned how to nurse in English. So she was a very capable nurse, but she didn't actually understand the English language. She just understood how to nurse in English.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. When my dad came over, he actually joined the U.S. military because that you could use that to fast track yourself into citizenship.
Right.
It was a different time back then. One of the things that they didn't have is conversational English.
Right.
But one of the things that they did have, both of them, is a knowledge of Shakespeare.
Really?
That's right. So when they were growing up, when they were in high school, Shakespeare was translated into Korean. And so when my dad first read that, he thought, this is amazing. This is literature. This is something that's just remarkable. And he had that relationship with Shakespeare, with Hamlet even. So when I asked him, hey, do you want to go see Hamlet this summer? He said, yes, I do. And I thought, well, so it's going to be Shakespeare. He's like, I already read it. And it shocked me. It shocked me. But that's the kind of thing where it is embedded into not just kids who grew up here in the United States. Yeah. It's embedded into the stories and understandings of immigrants who come over here. It's a part of all of us in a way that it's hard to really say Shakespeare only belongs to the British. You know, it is such an international thing, and it is woven indelibly into the fabric of our people here, because we're not all from the same place, and we all have a common understanding of what great theater and great literature is.
I love how transcendental Shakespeare is. Cultures, races, time, like the stories, the things that these plays are grappling with, the questions, the themes, they fit everyone. They fit every time. It feels contemporary.
It does. Yeah. And as we've been looking at how we're going to continue to tell these stories, as we understand Shakespeare to be such an American playwright, because our American experience can be translated into it so much, we're thinking a lot about what these plays are going to look like. How do they reflect our current experience? Well, they do just by reading the play. When you read the play, then you're like, this reminds me of something that's happening in the world right now. People have asked us, why did we pick certain plays? And there are certain plays that we picked with Shakespeare that we want to tell this story now. We think that it's time to tell this story now, or we haven't told this story ever, or we haven't told this story in at least 10 years, in the case of Romeo and Juliet, and never in the case of Coriolanus. And then there are folks who are like, ooh, this play is really topical. Coriolanus is, it's a very political play. It deals with a guy who was a soldier for Rome and then found himself outcast by the politicians and the senators of Rome, and then turned his back on the country, and then kind of came back to try to tear Rome down. Are we okay with this kind of very overt political story? I'm like, well, Shakespeare wrote this play 450 years ago, and he was writing about the Romans.
Right.
So if this is topical now, it's because it talks to who we are as a people. It talks to who we are individually, and it speaks to what must be a very human tendency in us, that when we kind of come together as a collective and ultimately we form communities and ultimately we form small governments or whatever, there are times in which there are going to be people who are going to butt up against that social order. And so these stories happen. They have happened in history, and they will happen again. If there's a coincidence in our current events happening around at a similar time to the plays that we are producing, we can't not let that occur. But we're also not going to shy away from it if there are going to be parallels. Also, we're looking at Romeo and Juliet, two households both alike in dignity, in Fair Verona, where we lay our scene from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. Here we are now, these two families that have an ancient grudge. Why do the Capulets and Montagues hate each other? I don't know. Why do the Hatfields and McCoys hate each other? I don't know. Why do these two political factions hate each other and demonize each other? Well, because that's part of human nature, apparently, for us to demonize people who are not like us. And we can demonize them because they are of a different class or a different race or a different religion. Now we can demonize them because they are a different ideology. We like to demonize because that's something that is in our dark lizard brain human thing, where we like to say us versus them. It is a part of our natural defense to protect ourselves and keep us in a cave and keep our people safe from the things that are out there. And sometimes when we put those into social settings and we put families or cultures or classes on opposite sides of whatever we've determined to be a dividing line, that's going to lead to bloodshed. And we don't like that, and we want to change that, but we can't necessarily always change that. There are still bombings happening in Gaza. So we know that this is a part of the human experience. We can't shy away from it. All we can do is shine a light on it, try to make some beauty happen to help us see the consequences of this means that young people will die. People that you love, that you care for, that are innocent are going to die because you two have decided that you are going to hate each other and you're going to foment hatred. And these are the consequences, and you're going to have to face it when your children are dead.
Right.
Yeah. I think a lot of people don't look at Romeo and Juliet that way. A lot of people look at it as just a simple love story.
And it is, but it's a love story in the context of families that hate each other. And the reason that it hurdles in just a matter of days from the most passionate love to the death of the two young lovers is because of the context between those two families who have decided that they hate each other, and they've created structures in place where everybody around understands the Montagues and the Capulets are going to hate each other, and it's a really hot day in fair Verona, and people are going to get hot and bothered, and then it's going to happen, and there's going to be a fight.
Yeah, well said, Jason.
Can I share a story from Musifire rehearsal?
Please do.
So we're talking about, like these stories being transcendental in every time. We're rehearsing Much Ado About Nothing right now, and we were doing some table work around the wedding scene where Claudio rejects Hero because he believes that she's cheated on him and he's been deceived and all of that. But he waits until the wedding day. He doesn't go and talk with her the night before or whatever. He like, it's very public, and it's a really ugly scene, right?
Yeah.
And so we're talking about this, and somebody was like, I know this. I've seen this. And I'm like, what are you talking? And we started this whole conversation. I guess a while ago, there was this video that went viral of a bride who on her wedding day, in her vows, like whole 9 yards, everybody's all dressed up. They process down the aisle, everything. It's like the wedding video that went viral of her calling him out for cheating on her at the wedding. Like, this is a video from 2025 or 2024, really? Right? And they're like, yeah, this is like, that's what this is, So just again, like these things history repeats itself, right?
Yeah, it's a part of our human nature. Like you hurt me, and I'm going to find the maximal way to hurt you too.
Right.
And so here we have
but even our, our 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds see that and recognize that, see ourselves in these pieces.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why we think that Shakespeare is such a core playwright of the American experience.
Just to tie it all back in there. Well, I mean, Jason, we joke about this, but he really is, when we think about Shakespeare in our American experience, Shakespeare as we know it, we all have that class that we took that we learned about Shakespeare.
Yeah.
If you went to school in the United States, we all learned about it in 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. It was a part of our English language assessments,
Sure.
If you went to school overseas, it was a part of your literary experience.
Yeah.
Whether it was 9th grade, 10th grade, however they grade them back then. It is a common thread that ties us all together where we all can understand this. But it also shines a light on exactly what you're talking about, on those primal feelings and our primal way that we interact with each other. All of that is there, and that it defines what we're doing and how we present ourselves in the world.
You're absolutely right, Connie. And just to also put a fine point on this, except for The Merry Wives of Windsor, Shakespeare did not write an original story. He was adapting his plays from other pieces, whether they were from Holinshed's Chronicles for the histories, whether they were from Plutarch's from the Roman stories, whether and Romeo and Juliet was an Italian story. Yeah. He was always taking another play, or even the Lodge's story for As You Like It was a complete. He completely stole the entire story from As You Like It from a relatively popular novella that was already out called Rosalind. So it wasn't that Shakespeare kind of came up with all of these ideas about the human experience. That wasn't necessarily it. He was writing stories he was writing plays that he knew would sell tickets. He was writing these stories to get people in, and he was writing about stories that he knew that people would relate to.
Right.
What makes him, in our estimation, a playwright that continues to this day to continue to influence what we do, and obviously it influenced the founding of this country, was the way he utilized language, the way that he created those ideas that we talked about, put them into the words in the way that he put them, in the order and the structure that he put them, and then also created enough ambiguity, enough undefinable stuff around there, that he didn't answer every single question. He allowed space for both the loyalists and the colonists to see themselves in the stories of Coriolanus, to allow both sides of warring factions to see themselves in these plays, because there was enough ambiguity, there was enough space in these plays for us to then bring ourselves into the table and into the mix.
Right.
I think it's that unique quality both of the language that people like Adams, Jefferson, Franklin could read and then want to emulate in certain ways and kind of find ways to mimic or at least elevate their own language to kind of match the mastery of the work that Shakespeare put onto the page. And it was in Shakespeare's writing, the space that he gave for all of us to see ourselves in this story from a variety of different angles, that creates the enduring quality of Shakespeare. And it's why the plays continue year in and year out, generation after generation. Coming up next, we'll be joined by author and scholar James Shapiro, whose works Shakespeare in a Divided America and The Playbook examine how Americans have turned to Shakespeare to understand our politics, our passions, and our place in the world.
Some stories fade, others become legend. Join our Bard and Beyond book club and uncover the legacies that inspire our storytelling. Visit pashakespeare.org/book club for more details.
Before we begin our next segment, a brief note for our listeners. This conversation was recorded prior to the passing of former Vice President Dick Cheney. Mr. Cheney is referenced in connection to his readership and engagement with Shakespearean scholarship. We've chosen to maintain the reference in this episode and extend our deepest respect to Mr. Cheney's family.
Today, we welcome one of America's foremost scholars on Shakespeare. He is the Larry Miller Professor of English and Comparative Literature at Columbia University. He's currently the Shakespeare Scholar in Residence at the Public Theater in New York City, and he's the author of, among other things, A Year in the Life of Shakespeare, 1599, Shakespeare in a Divided America, The Year of Lear, Shakespeare in 1606, and most recently, The Playbook, a story of theater, democracy, and the making of a culture war. Please welcome James Shapiro to As You Mic It.
Delighted to be with you today.
Thank you very much. So in your book, Shakespeare in a Divided America, which came out in 2020, of all years to be published, Shakespeare in a Divided America, you said, read by almost everyone at school, staged in theaters across the land, and long valued by conservatives as highly as by liberals, Shakespeare's plays remain common ground, one of the few places where Americans can meet and air their disparate views. For well over 2 centuries, Americans of all stripes, presidents and activists, writers and soldiers, have also turned to Shakespeare's works to give us voice into what could not readily or otherwise be said. So, Jim, where does Shakespeare fit into the American story of our nation?
We're about to experience America 250, and you would think, or I might think, that the nation would be celebrating some of its greatest playwrights. Arthur Miller, Thornton Wilder, Tony Kushner, more recent ones, Paula Vogel, James Imes, and others. I just logged on to the Kennedy Center site to see what's coming up, and it was Monty Python's Spamalot. That is the dramatic offering. So I would begin by saying our country has a spectacular theatrical legacy, setting Shakespeare apart, some extraordinary American dramatists who helped us see who we are. Don't expect a lot of that coming out of this administration and its visions for America 250. As for Shakespeare in a Divided America, the last chapter of that book, for those who've read it or for those who haven't, describes a production of Julius Caesar at the Delacorte Theater in Central Park that Oscar Eustis directed. And he directed it 6 months after Donald Trump first took office.
Right.
And it was a time unlike our own where a brave director could stage Julius Caesar with a Trump lookalike as Caesar assassinated in the Senate, mostly by people of color.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there would be a dangerous backlash today. There was a backlash back then. And I advised that production and sat through night after night when right-wing activists charged the stage, threatening the actors. The first person who did so was Laura Loomer. And
Really?
I didn't include her name in the book, only in the notes. I didn't want to give her publicity. What I didn't realize when I wrote that chapter was I was watching a dress rehearsal of January 6th and everything that followed. So for me, that chapter and that book exemplifies Shakespeare's place in America, by which I mean he tells us what is going on. He tells us what is going to happen. There's a predictive quality to great Shakespeare productions in this country that expose fault lines, tensions, divisions that journalists and historians just can't see.
You know, it's fascinating. Also in that chapter, you reference a screenplay written by Steve Bannon of Coriolanus that was highly racist in its language and in the characters it was created. But he also, early on, before he became the Steve Bannon that we know, was pitching an idea of a Shakespeare play to reflect on American society.
Yeah, and it was riots in LA and violence. And I suppose if there's anything Shakespearean that's going to be at the Kennedy Center, or as Trump calls it, the Trump Kennedy Center, it'll be Steve Bannon's Coriolanus.
It's so funny, though. We're here at Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival. We have been a part of the Shakespeare in American Communities grant program that was founded by another Republican president, or at least we know was initiated during the George W. Bush administration. And I just had gotten off a call recently about the Overton window and the ideas behind the Overton window and the idea of public policy has shifted so much and so quickly over time. I wonder if you can just kind of reflect a little bit on how, up until this point, the ideas of Shakespeare's plays were adopted by people of all political stripes.
I want to give a shout out to Shakespeare in American Communities, which is an outstanding federal program that brings Shakespeare to communities that otherwise might not have the resources to stage his plays. And the last time the government did this was in the mid to late 1930s through the Federal Theater Project, something like Orson Welles directing 150 Black artists in Macbeth that sat down in New York, Lafayette Theater in Harlem, and then toured the country, even in going into Jim Crow, Texas. So we have a long history in this country of taking Shakespeare out of the major metropolitan locales and bringing Shakespeare to the American people. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, every small town in America had a theater or two, and this is before movies took over.
Right.
And Shakespeare was seen and appreciated by a vast majority of Americans, and that dried up in the early 20th century. You can look at moments where Shakespeare brought joy and pleasure to people. You can also look at moments where Shakespeare was at the center of deep divisions. The Astor Place riots in the mid-19th century, where Americans actually killed each other over Shakespeare, which is something other nations have never quite done. So Shakespeare has long mattered in this country. Abraham Lincoln was a fanatical reader of Shakespeare. The man who assassinated him, Booth, was a fanatical actor of Shakespeare.
Right.
And you could really tell the history of America going back to our earliest presidents, John Adams reading Shakespeare for its political insights, right up through our own moment, and take the temperature of the country, see what its fault lines are, see what its potential and limitations are. That's why I go to as many productions as I can, good, bad, and ugly, simply because they always tell me something about the moment that I can't discover otherwise.
Well, you've just kind of started to answer the question that I was about to ask you, which, and you have spent decades watching lots of Shakespeare. My understanding is that's how you kind of got started, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit to our audience about how you got started just falling in love with Shakespeare by experiencing it. But for your understanding, what is it about Shakespeare, the playwright? What is it about Shakespeare, these plays that draw us in? That is the chief playwright that we continue to go back to, that we've been going to now for over 250 years?
I should say I fell out of love with Shakespeare before I fell in love with Shakespeare. And I took maybe the worst junior high school Shakespeare class imaginable.
Oh, no.
We read Romeo and Juliet. We sat in rows. I didn't even get the dirty bits that my classmates got. And I swore never to study Shakespeare formally again, never to take a college course. I never did study Shakespeare formally again. I'm one of those people who believes that the plays are meant to be seen rather than read.
Yeah.
And in my teens, I'd hold down some crummy job in New York City, selling Guatemalan handicrafts, street messenger, medical secretary, whatever job I could hold for May, June, and July, quit the last day of July, take a cheap flight, Freddie Laker, $99 round trip at the time to London, sleep in a church basement or a youth hostel for $1, and see a play for 50 cents on a student card. And in 25 days every August, I'd see 25 Shakespeare plays, which you could do with superstar actors at the time. The Ian McKellens, Helen Mirrens, they were all doing Shakespeare then. And I did this year after year. It was like a drug. It was much less expensive than other drugs I was interested in. And kind of like Demetrius in Midsummer Night's Dream, that I took the drug and I have stayed drugged out on Shakespeare ever since, and have the pleasure of working with great actors. I worked with Denzel Washington and his Othello this winter. I worked on Sahim Ali's Wonderful Twelfth Night this summer. And as long as I continue to be asked, I'll keep returning to rehearsal rooms. So that is the short and long of how I fell out and then in love with Shakespeare, which my students can't do because the Othello I worked on with Denzel sold for hundreds of dollars a ticket. They couldn't see it.
Yeah.
Access is not easy. And we need subsidized theater badly in this country.
Well, it's so funny because I was thinking about the story of the Astor Place riots and Macready performing in the Opera House, which was designed intentionally to keep out anybody who couldn't afford those kid gloves, right? It was architecturally designed and structurally designed to keep everybody out, and so then they put a British up there.
You can forget about the hoodie you're wearing; they would have kicked you out at the door.
Absolutely. But that was part of the point. And so then the kind of class differences in who can attend Shakespeare, you experienced it just this year, doing Othello for $900 tickets and having a free Shakespeare. And yes, you would have to stand in line and get there at maybe 3 a.m. in order to get yourself one of those free tickets. But it was still free performance. It was for the public. I wonder if you might be able to reflect a little bit on just, again, some of that history of the Astor Place riots, how the different cultural viewpoints of who could own Shakespeare, the people who followed, who followed Forrest, the people who followed Macready, the kind of grafting on of a cultural identity to Shakespeare, and how that kind of came about in this violent riot in New York City.
Somewhere between 10,000 and 24,000 New Yorkers surrounded the Astor Place Opera House and did not want to let an Englishman play Macbeth. What's lost in the focus on the violence, which is interesting in and of itself, is there were 3 productions of Macbeth that evening in New York City.
That's wild.
Just think about 10,000 people going to see just Macbeth. So it's not just the hyper-educated class. Right. It wasn't just Washington Irving and Herman Melville, who was a supporter of Macready's production. It mattered. And attached to Shakespeare, as you suggested, were certain values. Forrest and a kind of manly American vision of manifest destiny, a different notion of manhood embodied in Macready's much more subtle and intellectual Macbeth. So the very nature of their performances reflected values that were already dividing Americans and attracting Americans. So again, if you want to understand, if I need to understand notions of manliness in this country, which have always been with us long before Pete Hegseth has made everybody in the Pentagon do 100 push-ups a morning or whatever else he's doing. We no longer have access to that. You had Charlotte Cushman, one of the great actors of the 19th century, play Romeo better than any guy could play Romeo, because guys couldn't play the guy who Juliet made effeminate, as Romeo puts it, and at the same time play the manly guy who kills Tybalt in Paris later. So it's really hard to get a bead on these things which we actually care about, which shape our country, which shape our politics, which shape our values. And again, no matter how bad the production, and I've seen some pretty bad ones, I walk away with a deeper knowledge of the world I'm living with, which is why we really need Shakespeare, in American communities and programs like it.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, as this is going into my fourth season as the artistic director here at Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival. And one of the things that I'm surprised by, and maybe I shouldn't be, but I'm still surprised by some folks who have, maybe you don't experience this in New York as much, but I'm surprised by folks who have a preconceived notion of the productions as they ought to be performed. And you having seen hundreds of plays, hundreds of versions of Shakespeare plays, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about interpretation, the value of interpretation, and how that has impacted both your work as a dramaturg, working alongside some of the best Shakespearean actors that are able to grace the stages in New York with the Public Theater, and some of the shows that you've also been able to see.
I'm often asked, why are they doing it in modern dress? Why aren't they wearing doublet and hose?
Yeah.
And I smile and suppress the urge to strangle the person asking me that question and put on my best smiley face. And I say, doublet and hose was modern dress production in Shakespeare's day. Yeah. Why would you want anything else but what is Shakespearean, which is contemporary dress? People don't really get it. They have associations of highbrow Shakespeare, and they think Shakespeare's set in any other moment, the present moment is defacing or undermining the greatness of these plays. They're not, they never were, even in his own day, staged uncut. They never were staged without a kind of political edge. So those people who want to imagine a kind of sanitized Shakespeare that's free of any kind of tensions about class and who owns Shakespeare, who gets to act Shakespeare and the like, they have a very impoverished historical understanding of these plays. And one of the things that I try to do in my writing is to try to explain what they will gain by appreciating the ways in which theater companies across the land are trying to make Shakespeare speak to the moment. Because I assure you, if his plays 400 or so years ago didn't speak to their moment, playgoers would have flocked to his competitors' theaters.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Okay, so I want to play devil's advocate for just a second here, and I want to say, okay, so you talk about how Shakespeare's plays speak to the moment. However, if we take away the historical context in which these plays were presented, are we not losing something of the relevance of how these plays spoke to Shakespeare's people at his time?
It's important to distinguish between the ways in which modern dress productions or set in different times and places today are done, and respect for the language and convention of what Shakespeare wrote. I'll give you a striking an example as I can, or a couple of them. Thee and thou, and you.
Yeah.
In Shakespeare's day, they registered in different ways. They meant something different. If I spoke to you and addressed you as somebody listening to this conversation would have understood that either I was speaking in a kind of intimate way, we were old friends, or I was speaking in a kind of condescending way, or I was speaking in a real put-down way. So in Twelfth Night, where there's a line, thou, should thouest him a few times to really put him down. I remember working on a production of Troilus and Cressida, and one of the actors used the word thou in a kind of gracious way, as if he was speaking from the King James Bible. And I said, that's not a nice thou, that's an F-U thou, although I used the words, not the letters. And he got it immediately, and the scene worked because he understood that. In many of Shakespeare's comedies, there's a moment where a man and a woman hold hands in a handfast. And in Shakespeare's day, that was a legally binding marriage. And whether it's in As You Like It or The Tempest or Comedy of Errors, Give Me Your Hand, Elizabethans knew what that meant. So when I work with contemporary actors, I do my best to make them understand the conventions that Shakespeare relies on and his audience would have understood. We lose touch with that, we lose touch with the plays. I'm dead set against what the Oregon Shakespeare Festival developed for a few years, which is translating Shakespeare into modern American English. One, because that modern American English changes every few years and it's going to sound off or antiquated pretty quickly. And two, because all there is a language. Yeah. And good actors can pick up that language, and sometimes with the help of scholars or dramaturgs in the room, and audiences pick up the language. And even if they only get 70 or 80%, we have to remember Shakespeare was inventing words all the time. It wasn't as if two playgoers at Macbeth turned to each other listening to Macbeth talk about the assassination and said, well, what is that word? Because that was the first time anybody used the word assassination. Right. So Shakespeare's assuming you're not going to get every word, but you're going to get the gist. And I would say to anybody who fetishizes the language in certain ways and thinks we have to know all the words, you don't have to know all the words. It wasn't written that way, and it doesn't play that way.
Yeah, that reminds me of a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, that in the book of Shakespeare in America that you were the editor of, Emerson writes about Shakespeare, and he says, though the speeches in the plays and the single lines have a beauty which tempts the ear to pause on them for their euphemism, yet the sentence is so loaded with meaning and so linked with its foregoers and followers that the logician is satisfied. His means are as admirable as his ends. Every subordinate invention by which he helps himself to connect some irreconcilable opposites is a poem too. He's not reduced to dismount and walk because his horses are running off with him in some distant direction. He always rides.
That's beautiful. One, I can never recite that as well. Two, I can never write that as well. So I'm jealous of both you and Emerson, but that's spot on. And that's really what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was having a conversation. We do a book club that we've just we were launching our second season of the book club, where we actually are having conversations about the plays we were about to be producing. And so we had 16 people who just love Shakespeare's plays and want to talk about them around the room. And we were talking about As You Like It. So of course, questions about gender came up, and questions about the idea of banishment and how resonates so much in our world today, in ways that it didn't even 2 years ago, or maybe 9 months ago. But all of that to say, then when we got to the language, we got to the poetry, it's like the plays, the language just washes over you. You have to let yourself be in the space and take it all in. So it makes me wonder also about those people in America's founding that loved the language because they were reading it, and then you had those people who were able to see it. We're in Pennsylvania, and William Penn, was famous. This Commonwealth did not allow theaters during its puritanical beginnings, but then these theaters started to crop up. So I wonder, Jim, if we could actually shift a little bit back to the kind of the history of how Shakespeare and so the productions of plays really kind of made their way into our founding culture.
I divide it into North and South.
Okay.
From really early on in Virginia, you had productions. You would have a production, one of the earliest in this country, of Othello in 17 something or other, where Native Americans were brought in to sit and watch a production of Othello.
Yeah.
And at the time where in Massachusetts or your great state of Pennsylvania, you couldn't do plays. And by the time you get to the Revolutionary period, you're seeing more theater being done. You're seeing American troops put on Coriolanus. I mean, these plays spoke to American aspirations. The plays that had Republican values like Julius Caesar were always of interest in this country. For me, one of the most interesting individuals in terms of, are we reading these plays? Are we seeing them? Was President Lincoln, to me, the greatest reader of Shakespeare in the history of this country. He felt it more deeply. He obsessively read and reread these plays. But until he became president and was living in Washington with access to 3 theaters, he never saw a play on stage.
Yeah.
And once he did, he was hooked. And the guy who shot him knew where to find him at Ford's Theater. But he would see every Shakespearean play, invite the actors to the White House, as bizarre a concept as that is imaginable today, because he understood once you took plays and he, committed largely to memory, certainly speeches from them, you could see them. You could see great actors bring them alive. And he would have been one of those noisy theater goers, always whispering to somebody, doing kind of play-by-play, explaining they cut that line or he missed that cue or whatever it was. I'll cut him some slack, but he is representative to me of how Americans who weren't college educated, Lincoln barely had an elementary school education, found these plays accessible, meaningful, and he didn't much like To Be or Not to Be. He loved Claudius's guilty speech later in Hamlet, because this was a guy who felt responsible for the deaths of more than 700,000 fellow Americans. So there's a connection, a personal connection, a national connection that will still be there when the current administration's gone. And I believe that because we need writers like Shakespeare, and Shakespeare in particular, to pull us together. He's common currency. Dick Cheney reads my work as well as you. You and he might not have a lot in common, but that's the case.
Right.
Supreme Court justices who don't believe that Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare, as well as the late, great Ruth Bader Ginsburg, read my work, wrote to me about it, exchanged ideas. So we all have an investment in Shakespeare. He somehow flies under the radar of censorship in this country. 90% of American kids still read Shakespeare in school. Taylor Swift can still come out with albums that cite Ophelia. So, and I'm hoping we'll get millions of our followers to go read the play because of that. Maybe a few, maybe not. We'll see.
Well, I just have a couple more questions before we wrap this up, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about casting. You mentioned Charlotte Cushman, and we also know, famous American actor Ira Aldridge, who spent most of his career actually overseas performing, where America didn't seem ready for a black man to actually play Othello. So you've wrote in Shakespeare in a Divided America. It turns out that who gets to perform in Shakespeare's plays is a fairly accurate index of who's fully considered American. In your experience, working on a variety of Shakespeare plays, can you talk about casting? Can you talk about how casting has evolved over time, and who is fully considered American when you think about it in terms of Shakespeare's plays?
You can hear from my Brooklyn accent that had I tried to go into the profession in the 70s, it would not have worked. Ben Stiller sounds a bit like me, and he got his start at the Public Theater under Joe Papp, as did many actors of color, Denzel Washington, Raul Julia. The Public Theater, more than any other theater in this country, after the closing of the Federal Theater Project, which did give actors from all kind of ethnicities a shot. The public theater in the late 1950s, opening at the Delacorte in 1962, made sure that actors of every race, creed, and accent got to be in these plays. Before then, you had to sound like Laurence Olivier and be white to act in Shakespeare. And I think that the 60s, where this was happening, corresponds to the civil rights era in this country. It's not accidental that these two things were happening. And for those who have seen Shakespeare of late, whether you like it or not, you have women playing King Lear or Hamlet or Richard II or Richard III or all female casts or all male casts of these plays.
Yeah.
You see increasingly those who are disabled appear on stage in ways that would have been unimaginable a couple of decades back. So there's a democratizing impulse in the history of the staging of Shakespeare in this country, which I approve of. There may be those who don't. It takes sometimes a little getting used to.
Yeah.
And once you're used to it, you realize that's great.
Yeah. From my experience, it allows me to appreciate the plays differently when I hear it said through the bodies and mouths of people who I might not necessarily consider saying those words. That to me has been one of the great things about watching people from different backgrounds and different abilities say these texts.
And when I send my students to see these productions, they're not aware that it was in my lifetime that these changes took place.
Sure.
They see it as normative, and I think that's great.
So one of my final questions, and we'll see, I'm really curious what you have to say about this, but we were talking about, soldiers, American soldiers doing Coriolanus, which is not necessarily a well-known play. We're going to be producing it for the first time in our 35 years the upcoming season.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Are there any of Shakespeare's plays that you think are missing from the conversation that you think would be important for us to really consider in this moment in time?
There are two ways to answer that question. One is there has always been a top 10 of Shakespeare plays going back to the 19th century. Hamlet, Lear, Twelfth Night, Midsummer, Julius Caesar, and 3 or 4 others. And both on stage and in the classroom. Othello and The Merchant of Venice have forced their way into the more multicultural classrooms in this country. And plays like Julius Caesar have slipped a bit. And I always ask my students, who has read X, Y, and Z? So 1/3 of the canon is repeated all the time. Another third of the canon, plays like Coriolanus, which is a tough play to do, Troilus and Cressida, another tough play to do, plays like Pericles, plays like The Winter's Tale, manage every few seasons to find their way on stage. Sure. And then there are the ones that are box office disasters. No matter who you're casting, no matter how brilliant the director, you will not get a crowd out for King John. Henry VI, Part 3, I love it personally, but empty seats filling the theater. And, Henry VIII, forget about. So I think it's not like they're good plays or bad plays. Plays like Titus Andronicus, for a long time, were off the mat. Julie Taymor helped put it back in circulation in this country. So it's a kind of stock market of plays. Some rise, some fall, some are blue chip, and some come into view. I think Coriolanus is an extraordinary play. I think it's a timely play. Michael Sexton did a version in New York just when Trump was surprisingly elected the first time, and it was electric for that reason. So it's a deeply political play. It's a play about the mob and what it means to be a charismatic leader. Those are issues that matter in America today. Yeah. I would like 1,000 theater companies to put on Coriolanus differently next year, not just yours, and have a national conversation. Ain't going to happen, but it would be a good conversation.
So to wrap up this conversation, Jim, I'm wondering as we do look forward into the 250th anniversary, is there something that you would like our audience to really take away and to remember about Shakespeare's place in America's story?
We're living at a time when AI is threatening creativity, where slashed budgets for the NEA, the NEH, any kind of support for the arts is endangered right now. My advice is go see productions, take your kids to productions, take your grandkids to productions, take your neighbors to productions. You will have a memorable experience. It'll expand your mind in ways that TikTok can't and won't. And I always go back to this. Theater and democracy were twin-born in ancient Greece. You do not and cannot have a strong democracy without a strong theater. And you cannot have a strong theater if you do not have a good democracy. You can't have one without the other. I think our country needs to do a better job of remembering that.
Professor James Shapiro, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us on As You Mic It.
Good luck with Coriolanus.
Thank you.
Behind every standing ovation is a network of patrons who know that theater changes lives. With tickets funding only half the cost, PSF counts on contributions to produce world-class theater, cultivate new audiences, and nurture future generations of artists. Give today at pashakespeare.org/support. Great theater is a collaboration both on stage and off.
Before we wrap up today's episode, we're taking a moment for a peek behind the curtain.
A peek behind the curtain.
Oh, will it ever get old?
Never.
Right now, we are deep into the logistics of bringing our 2026 Summer Theater Series to life. And that means conversations about casting, design, direction, the creative decisions that transform a lineup on paper into a living, breathing festival on stage. So that's what we're going to talk about. We want to share a little bit for you all about what's happening in the season. When I'm out in the community and people are saying like, how's the festival going? Are you able to take a break? And I'm like, well, kind of, but not really, not anymore. Really. I mean, it's, so we like to mark certain holidays as good deadlines for us at this time of year. That by Halloween, hopefully we have all of our designers kind of locked in place and we're getting paperwork to finalize all those agreements, all the designers and all the directors. Then we want to then have a lot of our key production heads. As we've mentioned in previous podcasts, we bring in a whole host of people to help make the festival happen, to build scenery and costumes, design, hang and focus lights, sound equipment, all of that. Those are seasonal hires. Those are individuals that we hope come back year after year. Sometimes we get a lot of new folks, but we have people who are in those leadership positions who are making that work happen. And we like to get them on board and try to get some key leadership positions locked in and also begin the design conversations and scheduling those design conversations with designers and directors who are all over the country right now. We've got directors living in Florida, living in Philadelphia, working in New York. We're spread far and wide right now. Mm-hmm. So just gathering those folks who have their own busy creative and work calendars together to start these conversations. We are also then aligning those ideas with the budget, and that by Christmas and in the new year, we will have had successful design conversations, and we've started to do the hiring process, plus all the onboarding, and then of course there's casting. So that's the stuff that's happening on my end personally. I'm focusing on designers, directors, and then working with the director of production on getting key department heads. Connie, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what's happening with casting.
Sure. So now that we're in October, we have finished our equity principal auditions. And those are the first auditions that we as a theater company need to put out there into the world to start bringing people on board. Now, that is phase 2. Phase 1 was we've already pre-identified some people that we really want to make sure are joining the festival next year. And so we put our spit on them. We called dibs. And so well, a lot of our actors are very much in demand and they have very busy schedules. So we really want to make sure that we let them know that we care about them and love them and want them to be with us next season, just so that they make us a priority as we'd like to think that they're a priority for us.
Certainly.
So we have certain people that we've already pre-identified that we want to anchor each of the productions.
Yep.
And then once we do that, it makes it easier for us to say, well, who's going to play well off of these people?
Right.
And so the equity principal auditions is sort of that second round where we hear all of these wonderful actors from all around the area. People make the trip over from DC. I had people coming in from Virginia, out in Connecticut. They all came either to DeSales, they went to Philly, or they went to New York just to come and put their names in front of us.
Yeah.
Now, we don't have a lot of actors that we need to cast.
We are limited on the number of roles that we are going to hire. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, the piano lessons is a relatively small cast. Moriarty is a very small cast.
Yeah.
$1 Million Quartet is not the size of the producers this year.
Sure.
So there's a lot of very small casts that we have this year. And so when you see all of these amazing people coming in, it's just a question of, all right, odds are not great. But at the same time, there's some wonderful people that we have seen in the past.
Yeah, I know that if you're walking into equity principal auditions, and that's something that in your role as the associate producer, you have the great pleasure of being able to do. In previous years and in previous jobs, that was something that I got to do. And they can be a long day of meeting a lot of people and auditioning a lot of people. As an extrovert myself, for me, it's a great opportunity to meet so many people who love making theater that there can be some disappointment. And it's like, I think that you're really exciting. You're really dynamic. You're a great actor. I don't have a role for you, but boy, am I glad to have met you. I'm glad to know you, and I hope to be able to follow your career. And maybe if there's the thing that's right for what you do and what we're looking for, if they align, we'll bring you in. There can be some psychic weight and I hope I don't make any promises to people that I can't fulfill, and I don't want everybody to get their hopes up. But it is just it's part of the challenge of when you're auditioning people. But Kim, I mean, we've talked a little bit about these auditions before because and you're in the role of you've been an actor, you've been on the other side of that. What's the casting season like for you as an actor? What was it like for you as an actor? Can you kind of go back in your memory book?
It was so long ago. No, I'm kidding. So I remember going to open calls a lot, especially as a non-equity actor. And an open call is like, you kind of go, you show up, or sometimes there's a sign up that you can get a spot at, and you just kind of do your thing. And then there are callbacks where there are auditions that you get called into specifically for a role.
Yeah.
Say we're trying to cast, and I'm just throwing this out there, but say we're trying to cast the nurse in Romeo and Juliet. You go, who are the actors that we want to see again, or who are the actors who fit our vision for this role? And you go okay, now we're going to be called into that. So it can be a really busy time for actors just because of a lot of open calls, but it's always great when you are called in specifically.
Sure.
For a role. When you have a side in your hand, or a side is a part of the script, right? Your audition piece.
Right. You know that your odds are better.
Odds are better. Sure. And also, I always think about callbacks. Like, if you're called back, it means they think you can do the role.
Yeah.
Now it's just fitting the family together, right? Now it's just saying who goes together, who works in this vision, in this particular thing. But if you're called back, you could we're at a different director, we're at a different design, we're at a different, fellow actors, you might be the pick, right?
Right. Yeah.
So there were about maybe 400 people that came to audition for us for the EPAs.
Yeah.
And every single one of those auditions, I was thinking about something that Matt Pfeiffer had said to me. And he said, every single one of these actors took time out of their day to come to see you, to come put themselves out there. And so the best thing that we can do as people who are sitting on this side of the desk is to be grateful that people have given their time to be with us. And I think about that every single time if we're running late, or if maybe I would, in my heart want to cut someone off and stop them from going on. I think they scheduled their entire day to be here.
Yeah.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to be filled with gratitude that they want to be here and they want to be a part of the festival.
Yeah. And Yeah, I think that's fantastic, and I appreciate the fact that you do that. And those EPAs, although the odds for the EPAs are much smaller, we do hire out of the EPAs. We
It does happen.
That's right.
Yeah.
We had Nicole
Yeah.
Benoit last summer, as well as Noelle Diane Johnson.
Yeah, who came from the EPAs, people that took the time to show up and say, "Here I am, and I'm interested in this project.
Aren't
I'm
we
interested in
lucky?
your festival." Yeah,
That they did that.
absolutely. We're grateful that they spent that they scheduled their day so they could be around to show us what they could do.
They're amazing.
And so that's where we are right now. We're in the casting season. We're looking at trying to get the families together. We're looking at trying to get our teams of theater makers together, both the creative theater makers and the practical doers of that, with the crafts people. And that's where we are at this phase of the process. And we'll be in that for quite a while because we're hiring about 60 people on the production side, including all of our interns, and we have intern level folks in every single department. Although the casting is smaller this year, there are still dozens of roles to cast. And of course, once we cast them in the rep, we can't consider them for another show, or certain people are only available at certain times. And there's a lot of calculus involved in making all of that happen. So there's a lot of planning, and there's some meetings that are happening. Designs are going to be done for the shows later on, after the new year has begun. This is the kind of dreaming and scheming kind of time. And that's a peek behind the curtain. Well, that's it for this episode of As You Mic It. A huge thanks to James Shapiro for joining us today. And please keep an eye out in your local listings for the Great Performances presentation of Twelfth Night from the Public Theater, premiering on November 14th of 2025. For all of us here at As You Mic It and Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival, thanks for listening, and we'll see you at La Buddha.
Thank you for listening to As You Mic It, a Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival presentation recorded on the beautiful campus of DeSales University. Our music is by Cedric Lamar, with hosts Jason King-Jones, Kim Carson, and Connie Behringer. For more information on our summer theater series, giving opportunities, tickets, and more, visit pashakespeare.org. Be sure to like, subscribe, and we'll see you at La Buddha.
Love great theater? Fuel Pennsylvania Shakespeare Festival with a tax-deductible gift today. Your support keeps world-class Shakespeare on stage and unlocks donor perks like program recognition and special event invites. Give now at pashakespeare.org/support or call 610-282-WILL and ask for Bill Hoblin. Be a maker of theater today.